everyone, and welcome back to Age Gap Love Story. We are Carrie and Alan, and we are a married couple with a 32-and-a-half-year age difference. And we started this podcast and YouTube channel to offer information, support, and community to help make your age gap relationship successful. We are already on episode 8, and today's episode is kind of an add-on to the last episode. We are talking today about financial planning for age gap, long-term relationships, and marriage. And so we're going deeper into the financial issues of long-term relationships and marriages when you have a large age difference with your partner. And from dealing with children from previous marriages to prenuptial agreements to estate planning, we are going to cover it all today. And as always, we want to remind you that we are not offering financial or legal advice, so please consult your financial advisor or an attorney for specific advice related to your situation. And we also wanted to mention that the laws do vary by state and country, so you will have to do your own research. But we have a lot of personal experience having gone through all of these issues between the two of us, so we wanted to share what we have learned and what we think is practical advice. And I also wanted to mention a few housekeeping items. If you like the show so far, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. And if you haven't done that before, what you do is you go into the app, you search for the podcast, and you hit the button that says leave a review. It lets you push how many stars you want to give, and then you can also write a little comment. And I read all of those and I share them with Alan. And at some point when we have a few more, I can read some on the show and give you a shout out. So please do that. We would very much appreciate that. And I also wanted to introduce you to our first sponsor of the show. Thrive Market is an online grocery store and is a great place to buy healthy food items. I believe they are only available in the continental US. But if you are in the United States, we have a special link that I will add to the show notes and the description box for YouTube, and the link gives you a free gift up to $22 value when you purchase a Thrive Market membership. And there are 1 year and 1 month memberships available. And we have a Thrive Market 1 year membership, and we order lots of things from Thrive Market. We are gluten-free and dairy-free, so we have a lot of dietary restrictions, and Thrive Market is amazing for that. And I will also link to a blog post on my website where it shares all my favorite sugar-free pantry items that I order from Thrive Market. So please check it out if you're not already a member of Thrive Market. I think you're really going to love it, especially when it's harder and harder these days to go shopping since we're all having to wear masks and everything. So, and then the last housekeeping item I wanted to tell you is that the next episode, episode 9, is when we are going to jump into the topics of nutrition and wellness. We've kind of been talking about these issues here and there, but Alan and I are both very committed to eating well and doing whatever we can to protect our health for the future. And in addition to using Thrive Market, we just have a lot of tips that we want to share with you. So that will be episode 9. So we've broken down today's episode into 2 sections. The first one is financial issues related to long-term relationships. So if you're in an age gap relationship, but you're not ready to get married or you don't want to get married, then there are some specific issues to consider. And then the second half is financial issues specifically related to when you get married, because of course when you get married, it is a legally binding document or agreement in the United States. Especially, there are a lot of implications that you need to consider, and age gap relationships can bring in some certain, I don't want to say complications, but special issues that we're going to go over. So I have been talking a lot, and I think it's time for me to turn over the mic. So I'm going to let Alan jump into the issues of of the issues of financial issues when you're maybe living together, or you know that you're in a long-term, you're in a relationship basically with your significant other, and maybe there are some, these are the issues that you need to consider.
Hello. Just to list a few items, and again, there are probably more specifics that if you address the issue with your financial advisor or your attorney, that you should consider in greater depth, but this will get you started, I think, thinking in the right direction. If you're going to be living together, which if you're in a relationship, I'm assuming would be the case prior to marriage, you need to determine a number of issues. And some of those issues that are important would be your living expenses, who's going to pay for what and when, uh, and also that's going to be based upon how much each of you earn. Maybe one of you is a student and the other has a solid career with assets. It depends. And uh, perhaps one of the two of you may have children from a prior marriage to consider. So handling expenses is an important issue, and how you're going to handle the responsibility for that. And then also on that point, although it's not a pleasant topic, I think you need to plan for the possibility, not probability, but possibility that you're going to break up. And if so, how are you going to then disentangle yourself from commitments you've made as to what expenses you're covering and how you can back out and then separate from those commitments. There are also legal and financial obligations you may have, such as student loans, car payments, credit card debt, or other types of debt, or a mortgage on a piece of property. Let's assume that one of you owns a home and the other moves in. Is that person going to share the mortgage payment? And are they going to get equity in the house? And do you need to specify that in writing? So I know this is a pain to think about, but you may recall from previous comments that I've made, you either pay on the front end by putting in the effort to get something planned out, or you pay on the back end by not having it planned out and then having to deal with it on a much messier and time-consuming and painful effort basis. Also, there are issues such as life insurance. If one of you gives up a job or commits yourself financially to another because they have a heftier income and they're more solid, and you place yourself in essence in their care to a degree and lose your independence, how can you be protected if something happens to that individual during your relationship? One way to address this, and this is what Carrie and I did when we became serious, and Carrie became a student and quit her job at my suggestion, and she became more dependent on me. I set in place a term life insurance in policy with her as the beneficiary. So while she was dependent upon me financially, if I died, of course, being the older of the two, that's the greater probability that she would have some financial assets from the proceeds of the insurance policy to regain her independence and restart her life as an individual without me.
And this was before we got married. So Alan, when we were together, we'd been together maybe two years. But Alan wasn't at the point where he wanted to change his will or change his estate planning, his trust. But he wanted to make sure that I had some financial stability if something happened to him. So the life insurance was kind of a clever way to handle that, I think.
I thought of that all by myself.
Maybe I should talk about that one.
Okay.
I thought I should maybe talk about the next point, which is having children and not being married. I'm just doing my little public service announcement to women younger than me who may be thinking about having children, and I would just pass on the advice that marriage is one way to really protect yourself as a woman financially, and especially if you have children. So in other words, Just to be blunt about it, if you're going to have children, make sure you're married because you will have a lot more protection financially if something happens to your relationship and in terms of child support and things like that. And I'm not exactly sure of all the laws. Maybe you can still get access to child support if you're not married, but just from one woman to another, if you're going to have babies, be married.
Okay, on the next point, on the last one on this particular topic, you'll need to protect yourself if you're starting to become dependent on the other individual. And we talked about that other individual creating some protection for you by way, for example, of a life insurance policy. However, there are other ways to do it, and that would be to create a savings account and have that individual, in addition to you making the effort to put your money to the extent that you can in a savings account in your name, have the other individual contribute to that to provide some security for you in the event that that person goes away, either through a breakup or through death. And again, that's a possibility. Everybody's going to die. It's just a question of when, on that happy note. But it's just significant that you do the best you can to gain this independence. And other factors are, to the extent that you can, pay off debts to get a stronger financial footing if you do, in fact, find yourself independent. You may also want to set in place, if you do not have health insurance and the other individual, in fact, can get you on their health insurance policy, which is another reason to be married. In some cases, that's required. I think in most, that if an individual is working for a company that provides health insurance, I think if they want their spouse to be covered, that doesn't mean a partner, it means a marital spouse. So those are issues to think about. As you know, healthcare costs can be absolutely devastating.
Yes, so those are a few issues that you can consider if you are in a committed relationship, but you're not ready to get married. And we don't want to uh, present a bias here and say that we think everybody needs to get married. We actually think there are legitimate reasons not to get married. For instance, if your partner is much older, say for instance he's in his 80s and you're in your 50s and you're both financially independent and you both have maybe complicated estates or you have children from previous marriages, then there may actually be good reason not to get married because it just keeps it simpler that way. So we don't want to, I'm not saying, I just want to make that clear. We're not pushing you either way to get married, but um, I do think there are reasons to go in both directions.
Another reason on this particular point of a benefit of not being married is if each of you are collecting Social Security. If one person is 65 or older, or in some cases 62 or older, and the other person is that age, so you're both on Social Security, your benefits, I believe, and you should confirm this, are greater if you individually, on a non-married basis, continue to receive your benefits. So many couples that are in that circumstance will have sort of a mock marriage ceremony. And actually, Carrie and I went to one a few years ago where that was exactly the circumstance. The wife was in her mid 60s, or the woman on the couple side, and the man was in his mid 70s, I believe.
Older, like 80s.
Older than that? In any case, they had this mock wedding ceremony and a reception, and it was very nice. And they weren't married. They had every aspect of a marital relationship, but legally they weren't married, so they could each continue on their separate Social Security and Medicare policies.
Yes, and I would say another legitimate reason for not getting married is if you're not sure it's going to work out. And in this case, I may refer you to, I believe it is episode 4, where we talked about how to pick a partner. And we talked about some of the red flags and some of the ways that you can kind of evaluate your partner and make sure that it's a relationship that feels good to you and you think has a future. But if you are just having fun or you really love your independence, or you see these red flags. I mean, certainly we have a high enough divorce rate here in the United States that there's no reason to get married if you're only going to get divorced. So getting married versus not getting married is a very serious issue to consider. On that note, Alan and I have been married for 17 years now, and we feel like there are some very important reasons to get married and some benefits to being in that type of relationship. And I just wanted to share kind of a funny story. When I first met Alan, he was still in the process of being divorced and going through all the legal issues and working out all that. He had, I would say, more of a complicated divorce. And so he was maybe a little bit burned, I guess, so to speak, on the idea of being married. He'd been married many years, his first marriage. And he told me he wasn't really interested in being married again. And I mean, he was interested in having a serious, committed relationship. I just think because of the financial implications, he was concerned about getting into that situation again. And I was, as we mentioned in the past, I was pretty young when we met. I was 23, I think, or 24. I can't remember now. But I mean, marriage was like really not on my radar. I was thinking about graduate school. I wasn't in any hurry to get married. And so I was fine with that, whatever, I was just happy to be with him. We were having a good time and loved being together. And then, the years went by and we didn't really talk about marriage. We moved in together, but I don't know, it just things seemed to be going smoothly. And then we did go on vacation, and Alan busted out the engagement ring and proposed, which was a complete shock to me. I was absolutely floored, and I just had no idea that he was planning that, and he had changed his mind about getting married. And it did take some time, and of course now I'm thrilled that we're married, and really glad that we took that next step. But I thought maybe we could jump into some of the reasons to get married.
Yes, I would say first and foremost, and I know that people have different attitudes on this, and a more modern attitude is that marriage is not important, even if you do have children. But candidly, maybe it's because I'm older and have a more traditional view of marriage, but if you have children, planning on having children, I think it makes so much sense to be married from the standpoint of spousal support, depending upon the laws in your particular area or jurisdiction, from the standpoint of a secure commitment to a degree. Now, of course, divorce is always possible, but it's a contract. As Carrie mentioned earlier, it's a legal contract or an agreement, and that brings with it commitments and responsibilities. If you're not married, you forego a lot of that. And no matter how much you love the other person, I would think if they want to make a commitment to you, marriage is a solid statement of that commitment. So that's my bias, my point of view. I think other reasons to be married is that to a degree, and again, it can be bumpy at first, but it is an emotional commitment. If somebody is married, I would expect they're going to try a lot harder to make a circumstance in your relationship work out, that they're going to make that effort, go to counseling, adjust their behavior, change their circumstance, be more amenable to a compromise on problems and issues than somebody who's not married, which is, basically like a long-term dating relationship. Again, then that's my opinion. Also, as I mentioned earlier, from the standpoint of healthcare, very often it's absolutely required if somebody has a healthcare plan with an employer, or even independently if they have their own business, whatever the case may be, for them to add a partner on, that person has to be legally a spouse, a married partner. And again, healthcare can be an incredible financial drain if you don't have insurance. It's even expensive if you do have insurance. So I think that's really important. And it also shows others that I'm thinking about family, friends, depending upon whatever your affiliation may be from a religious standpoint or family standpoint on several different levels. If you're married, it shows people that you're there, that you're going to be around. And if you're associating with other couples that are married and you're not, sometimes it might create a doubt on their mind about whether they should continue a long-term friendship with you. So these are just a few thoughts.
Yes, and I would also add that being in an age gap relationship, we already have this stereotype working against us that um, that we're not a serious couple, that we're not like, it's not a real relationship. These are just kind of stereotypes that we have to overcome. And I think being married is one way to prove, not that we really have to prove anything to anybody else, but of course we all, I think to some degree, care what others think about us. And the fact that, that's why when I introduce us on our show, I say that we're a married couple. So whoever's listening understands we have made the commitment to each other and we're not just having fun. I'm not like a fling or, all those unfortunate stereotypes that apply to age gap relationships. That's unfortunately the reality, but I think being married, as long as you're comfortable with that commitment, is one way to prove to other people that we are a legitimate couple. And another kind of story is when I told my mom about my relationship with Alan, which now I'm trying to remember, I think it was um, in episode 3 and also in episode 5, I think, where we discussed like dealing with the public and dealing with our families. And I told the story about how I kept our relationship secret for 3 years. And then once Alan proposed, that was really kind of the push for me to tell people about our relationship and to tell my parents. And when I did tell my mom about us, I didn't say, by the way, I'm in a long-term relationship and he proposed and he's 30 years older. I kind of let out the truth slowly. So I started with the fact that we were in a relationship and that he was 30 years older. And my mom's immediate response was that it was never going to last. Alan really wasn't serious about making a commitment. But in my head, I was thinking, well, he's already proposed. So in a way, it almost gave me more confidence to tell her and to face the public, so to speak, because I knew that he was serious and he wanted to take our relationship to the next level, which he really did. Once we got married, we bought a home together, we adopted our furry little babies, our kitty cats, and so those are our kind of our babies. And it really just, bless you, it really just took the relationship to the next level, even though we'd already been living together. But it really did make a difference. Of course, we had a wedding with a ceremony in front of all our friends and all those things. So, did you want to say something, or should we move to the next point? Okay, so we're going to move now on to, I guess, the real meat of the episode, which is the financial issues related to marriage. And we found some really great information from a website called Investopedia, which Alan said he likes that website. So it got Alan's approval. And I will link to the article I found specifically, which is called What to Consider Before Marrying. So I thought that was a really great article, and Alan's going to go through some of the points.
Yes, and before we cover the points covered in the article that Carrie referenced a moment ago, I wanted to add my own points, if I may. And one thing that we came up with and keep current is what I call the pop-off letter, and I keep it in my computer under stored documents, and make sure that Carrie has a current copy of it as a Word document. And it basically says that if I should pop off or die suddenly, that here are the things that Carrie needs to know.
You should tell why you created it.
Or in the event that Carrie and I both pop off suddenly, like on a trip or something, that my two daughters will have instructions. And the reason that I created this is that I had a very close friend that passed away a few years ago. And as I thought I had my personal records as far as my estate plan and other issues, financial records, very well organized, I thought he did too, because he was a pretty meticulous individual. As it turned out, when he died suddenly, his widow, who was not involved in tracking the family finances, was bewildered. She was receiving pressure from the individual who had been appointed as the trustee for her late husband's estate to provide this information and that information, none of which she could find easily. And she had to sort through all sorts of things, and she called me in a panic. And I and another friend of my deceased friend, who was a retired attorney, we helped her put things together. And in that process, I realized how important it is just to have a complete yet simple explanation, maybe in a couple of pages, a list of all accounts, bank account, investment accounts, any property you own, debts that you own. Things like if you have a safety deposit box, where's that located? Where's the key to that box? What is the access code to my computer? What do I have on my calendar that needs to be addressed? Who can you call for help? A family friend, the attorney, the person that prepares your tax return. Everything that you can think of if you are the partner that manages the finances for you as a couple, have that information laid out. Don't make the assumption that if you suddenly die, that surviving spouse is going to be able to find this information and magically put it all together. And in some cases, there are entities that should be notified immediately, and there are others that shouldn't be notified immediately. Some of the financial institutions may freeze accounts, and therefore your spouse won't have access to funds to pay bills. So you need to think about this carefully, make a rough list, and then put together your pop-off letter and keep it current. Where are your insurance policies? Where are deeds to your property? Where is your social security statement? And the individual then will need your social security number to apply for survivor benefits. What numbers do they call to transfer things?
Property tax.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Property tax.
Property taxes, right. I mean, how do they change title? And on all your bills, what's the phone number and account number for your water bill, for your trash, for your mortgage payments, for all these things? You just think about the practical aspect of you being out of the picture and somebody coming in, sitting down at your desk in your home or your kitchen table and opening up a box and with maybe some paid bills. And where are our bank accounts? Well, who do I have to pay monthly? Well, who gets paid next? Well, who do I call? It's simple when you think about it, but it is extremely important that you leave that information behind. And if you do it together, make sure you both put together this information so something doesn't get left out for the survivor. So, and it's really important to keep that information current and available in a place where you both have access to it. One other thing that I'll mention before we get into the list, which I may have Carrie take over and cover those points, but one other thing is that a number of people create what's known as a living trust in addition to a will. Now, there are debates. Some people say you don't need a living trust unless you have a lot of assets. Attorneys very often will argue that you do to avoid a delay and some expenses. And again, I'm not an attorney. You should consult one depending upon the assets that you have and where you live, your particular jurisdiction, whether it's in the U.S. and states different or a foreign country, foreign to the U.S. that is. So you need to establish whether you should have a living trust in addition to a will, but everybody should have a will. Just don't assume. We have a close friend who has reasonable assets, and he's assuming that when he dies, that his wife will know what to do and that she will get everything. But yet he hasn't put together any kind of an estate plan, no will, no trust, zippity doo dah. So it's really not a valid assumption that things will go the way you want once you're gone. That hand beyond the grave is not there. You can't manipulate things. So anyway, decide if you need a trust, and keep it current. Review it every couple of years. Your children may grow up, your financial conditions may change. Just review it. Another thing you should set in place, again, if you have assets or you think you will acquire or inherit assets, I mean, there may be one of the two of you who doesn't have assets now, but let's say your favorite Aunt Minnie dies and leaves you $10 million, then you will have assets. How do you handle that? Do you keep it as separate property? So if you ever split up with your spouse, they will not have a claim to say it's community property and they own half of it. Also, if you do have assets now or substantial income and you are accumulating assets, you should have a prenuptial agreement. And these can be fairly simple and they can be structured a lot of different ways. Again, I'm not a legal counsel, but the way I had ours set up was that I believe the total term was 15 years because then I was in my 50s and of course Carrie was in her 20s. So we set it up so a certain percentage at the end of every 5-year milestone, or it may have been by year, a percentage of my assets would be paid or accrued to Carrie. So every year it grew. And at the end of 15 years, then it went to the full amount that we had anticipated, and it basically went away. The prenuptial agreement was no longer valid because then my living trust took over and the provisions for the assets to go to Carrie in a specified amount were in the living trust. And again, a qualified attorney can help you put these things together. It's also important to keep your prenuptial agreement current, just as you would a living trust or your will, is review it every few years. The pop-off letter that I mentioned earlier actually, I think, requires more maintenance, maybe every 4 months or so. So you need to make provisions if you have children from a prior marriage or children from your marriage. You need to provide for them in the will, the living trust, and maybe even in the prenup.
And I think there's one other important form that needs to be dealt with, which is called a power of attorney.
Healthcare.
Healthcare power of attorney. And that I think really applies to age gap relationships where one partner is going to be older.
Also, in many states, they refer to it as a living will. And the essence of it is if you should become incapacitated or severely ill and you are unable to make healthcare decisions on your own, the healthcare power of attorney and or the living will authorize your spouse or whomever you appoint to make your healthcare decisions for you, and it will have, if it's done properly, a list of provisions in it. So do you want to put on a resuscitator? If you are brain dead, do you want to be kept alive with the hope that something will change? So it has all these different issues to be addressed, because when you can't make those healthcare decisions and you're in a hospital, particularly if you're not married, that person, your partner, may not be able to come in and say, well, I know where they want this. I know they want to be kept sedated even though they're not going to recover immediately, or I want to wait for them to come out of the coma. Legally, healthcare officials cannot take that point of view, even in some cases for a married spouse. So get the documentation put together, prenup, living will, or, and living trust, and
Power of attorney.
the
Power of attorney.
and the power of healthcare power of attorney. go through these. And again, a good attorney will help you put these documents together. And once you've done it, it's much easier to keep them current than to get them started. But they are important.
And one issue we kind of touched on last episode that I think we should briefly talk about is this issue of having long-term care insurance. And because I think this also really applies to age gap relationships. Now, when Alan and I first got together, I told him about the story about my grandfather who had a stroke when he was only in his 50s, and he was basically brain damaged and incapacitated, and he did have long-term care insurance, but in his, I mean, he lived for another 20 years. He lived at home for about 10 years with 24-hour care, and that never would have happened if he had not had long-term care insurance.
On that point, I'm thankful to Carrie, well, for many things. But after we'd been together for a while, she did bring up the subject of long-term care because of the experience with her grandfather. I mistakenly, I think as many people believe, well, when I'm eligible for Social Security under Medicare, that will be taken care of. And Carrie said, I don't think so. So we did some research and we found an individual who had written a book on the subject called Caring is Not Enough. It's a soft cover small book. And his name was Gene, I can't remember.
Our agent,
Yes.
Tapper?
Yes, Gene Tapper. It was a book by Gene Tapper, and it is dated, but I think the information it is still quite valid. But he points out, having been an administrator in a long-term care facility, how Medicare really doesn't cover the needs of most people when you're in that circumstance. So after reviewing the book, we found out that we were able to track him down, and he had actually become an insurance broker or agent specializing in long-term care because he saw the need. So anyway, Gene helped us with a long-term care policy for me. Now, I have to confess that in today's environment, many of the companies that provide those policies don't provide them anymore. They just found it economically not viable. And those that do provide it, the premiums are really quite high because, as you know, healthcare costs have gone through the roof. But it's something you should look at. It may be possible. Maybe something you can get through an employer.
Yes, and I just looked it up. So actually the book is written by Terry Ann Black. So I think Jean must have just recommended it. But I will link to it in the show notes and the description. And then I wanted to recommend, I'm just looking at my laptop here, a book that I read also called Being Mortal. It was on the New York Times bestseller list for a long time. So you may have heard about it, but it is by a doctor called Atul Gawande, and he's a MD in the United States. And it is a book about long-term care and kind of his experience as a physician, seeing people in different long-term care facilities. And after reading that book, wow, I'm telling you, that was a mind blower. And it made me think about not only Alan as an elderly person. I mean, I hope that I am always able to care for Alan in his later years, and then with the help of any healthcare providers we may need. But then I started thinking about myself because I have no children. Obviously, Alan's not going to be around when I'm in my 80s and 90s. And so that made me think about saving money for my own care when I'm elderly. And so I would recommend both of those books, or one or the other, just really start to think practically about your future. And I think it all kind of ties in to these issues that we're talking about.
I just want to add that we also decided several years after I had my policy that while Carrie was young and the premiums were lower, the younger you are, obviously, the lower the premiums, because chances are you won't be seriously ill for a long time. So we did get a long-term care policy for Carrie also.
Yes, and I wanted to just go back to this other topic of a living will or a power of attorney.
Healthcare power of attorney.
healthcare power of attorney. That is also something that Alan and I review every few years, especially after I read that book, Being Mortal, because in a way it's a little bit depressing because this doctor goes through the decline of a lot of his patients and how they weren't treated well, or he could tell they were unhappy, or they weren't treated with the respect and dignity that he thought they should be. And so Alan and I do review those topics. I mean, it's not fun to talk about, but it's like if you can still feed yourself, but you can't, but you're in a wheelchair, or you can't, bathe yourself, but you still can enjoy watching TV. I mean, we kind of just talk between us about these different scenarios and what, Alan feels comfortable with.
And again, forgive me for being so redundant on this point, but it's back to that piece of advice I've given you more than once, and that is you pay on the front end or you pay on the back end. When would you rather discuss and set these issues and programs in place? Now, while you're well and you can think clearly, or when you're seriously ill and you may be affected as far as your logic is concerned by medication, or somebody else has to care for you and they don't know what you want or how to deal with it. So get these things done now. It's not fun, as Carrie pointed out, but it's better to pay on the front end than on the back end.
Yes, and a lot of this was influenced by watching my grandfather. He lived for about 20 years, basically not being able to speak or express himself or move. And I consider that to be a situation where he did not die with the dignity that he deserved. And I think he was really young. He was like in his 50s or late 50s when he had this stroke. But if his family, my grandmother and his children had known, I wouldn't have wanted to live 20 years being confined to a bed without being able to speak. I'm just throwing that out there. Some people may feel differently, but it's important to discuss these issues. So I will link to this article from Investopedia. It maybe covers a few other things that we have not been able to cover. I don't want to go on too long. I think we covered a lot, but there are just little things like if you get married, some other financial issues like being sure to update your tax information. Actually, that's another implication of being married, is that you file jointly as opposed to filing separately in the United States.
But it depends on your tax circumstance.
Okay, Alan says it depends. So I will link to the article. We have covered issues related to being married, not being married, all in the financial sphere. If you have questions, we can't really answer specific questions because we're not qualified, but if you have topics maybe that have come up in your mind that you would like us to research and explore, we're more than happy to do that and create another episode related to these financial issues. I feel like we've covered as much as we really could brainstorm. So again, it's up to you. If you know of other issues, please let us know. And I think that wraps up this episode.
Yes, thank you again for listening or watching, as the case may be. And as Carrie said, we do invite you to stay in touch with us, contact us. We've had a lot of wonderful emails from folks, and actually it's given us some ideas on topics that we need to address. So do stay in touch with us, and we look forward to having some interesting communication with you. Stay well, all the best, and happy Tata.
And I will link all the ways that you can connect with us in the description box and the show notes. And we look forward to hearing from you because we're really inspired by you. And we thank you for listening and watching. Take care, everybody. Bye.